Thanks for having us. My name is Kreil. Together with my colleague Patricia, we are co-directors of Prototype Fund, and we're here to talk about small fees, why funding new ideas matters. So as the title says, we're talking about funding, and particularly in the context of open source, which at this event makes a lot of sense. And first, I want to get this picture out of the way. It's the picture we all expect to see at any talk about funding. And the reason I'm putting it first is that we will not talk about this exceptionally. You probably know these pictures from a lot of talks about funding if you've been following this topic. The reason this picture is used a lot is that there is a trend of talking about infrastructure and maintenance among funders. This is a very, very good development in funding. The context is that funders, they generally want to fund shiny things. They want to be able to say, I have created this, I have made, I'm the reason this and this app happened and exists now. And they want new stuff all the time. Just, I helped maintain this is not very sexy to say as a funder. And there was a big evolution in that direction in the last years with the Sovereign Tech Fund, or now agency, that was built in Germany. There were a lot of reports about how we should fund infrastructure as road and bridges. The Open Tech Fund in the US started an infrastructure fund, and this is essential, and we need more of those, and there are no questions about that. However, we're here to talk about funding, innovation, and small projects today, because infrastructure being super important doesn't mean we should stop funding innovation and small ideas. Innovation can sometimes be seen as problematic because there is this, everyone wants to reinvent the wheel all the time. And there are people who say you just build software graveyards when you fund innovation, which is somehow true in some aspect, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. We should just find out how to do this better.
Yeah, and every project starts very small, especially when it's coming from an individual person. So maybe someday there was someone saying, I want to build an open source ticketing platform because this is something we so desperately need. And today you have all booked your tickets to FOSS Backstage via Pretix, which is exactly that. Or someone else maybe said some years ago, we need period tracking that does not sell and misuse the user data. And today, hopefully everyone here needing a period tracking app uses Drip. And what these projects have in common is that they only exist because they got the funding that they needed. It's still me. So, and one thing that's very important is the topic of diversity, because we want open source software to be diverse. We want people with very different backgrounds and with very different perspectives to be able to work on their ideas. But starting a project requires a lot of resources. You need time. You might need a network, and you might need to know certain people. And of course, you need a way to cover your expenses, such as rent or your food, but also maybe a server infrastructure. And a lot of people that come from more privileged backgrounds, they have all that. They have a network, they might have financial stability, but not everyone does.
And another reason is that expertise is not only in companies that have capacities, like they can do research and development, they have funds allocated to that. And people have ideas outside of these frames because they navigate communities with specific needs, or they have these needs themselves because they volunteer maybe, or they acquire knowledges and niches that are maybe not relevant to companies. For example, a cancer patient knows better which app they would need to go through that than a software company who thought, hey, there's a new business there, I'm just going to make something without knowing these needs. Or someone who teaches German to refugees probably has much more experience than a random company that has no experience in that level, and then you end up with Duolingo, which doesn't really work. Or Sea-Watch, the people who are on boats are the only ones who know which software is needed. And they don't only know how to do it, they must generally also know which software is needed, they are the first to know that a new tool is needed. For example, in 2020, in the pandemic, what we saw emerge in civil society was a lot of tools that help people connect with each other. For example, tools for video calls, because people actually needed those, and nobody needed like blockchain, Web3, whatever type of toys that were really trending at the time. What people wanted was stable calls in tools that were easy to use, to be able maybe to call also their grandma. And they wanted tools that reproduce social interactions. We saw like a lot of tools with people moving in calls and simulating bar situations because they wanted to reproduce real life. Or people wanted to be able to remotely work together without risking their lives going into the office. And without these alternatives to tech giants like Big Blue Button or Jitsi or Nextcloud, we'd have been using Google for everything and Zoom.
Yeah, so now that we've gone a bit over why this type of funding is needed, and before we go into detail and into our suggestions on why to fund small and early stage projects in a sustainable way, here's a little bit of context about us and why we are telling you all of this. So Marie and I, we are co-directors of Prototype Fund, which is a German open source funding program, which is itself funded by the German Ministry of Education and Research, and is a program of the Open Knowledge Foundation. So what do we do in a nutshell? We facilitate funding for open source projects for a funding period of 6 months. We did this for 16 rounds now, so 8 years in total, with a maximum of 25 projects funded per round, and with the latest round just having finished here 1 week ago inside the Boom with the demo day. Until now, we have supported each project with up to 47,500 euros per funding round, and we funded almost 400 projects. So to be very specific, it was 387 projects, and the total grants summed up to 16.6 million euros. And for all of that, over the duration of 8 years, as I said before, we received more than 4,000 applications.
We've been funding in 4 areas until now: civic tech, data literacy, infrastructure, and security. With civic tech and data literacy, we had more the type of projects that were also content-based. Think dots on the maps. Where do I find donation boxes? Where do I find sports places to do sports? That kind of stuff. And with infrastructure and security, we were having the classical infrastructure and security project you're thinking of, but also we always saw it as a bit wider, the infrastructure part, tools that are part of a modular ecosystem, as in more infrastructure for society than purely networking, Linux kernel stuff. That's how we've widened the scope a little bit.
Yeah, and something that to me is very special about Prototype Fund is that we provide a real lightweight funding structure. Why do we do that? Because we want to allow a maximum number of people to participate in the funding program, and this refers to really individuals, like private individuals and small teams, as opposed to companies, institutions, university, you name it, who mostly get the big fundings. And lightweight in our context, it means that the initial application form to get started with the funding is very, very short, very, very easy to deal with. Also, we and also our Projektträger, we provide a lot of administrative support, which is really needed when it comes to public funding. And also for the side of the grantees, there's really just a minimal amount of reporting that they have to do.
And as a funder, we have an approach that we funders like to call hands-on funding approach, which means we have very little formal and official reporting as a fund as such, but we still are very closely in touch with people. We do a lot of update formats. We offer coaching. We have one-on-one calls to check if they're doing great. We try to help them network among each other and that kind of stuff, because we have usually a lot of people who are not used to being funded in our community.
Yeah. Another important aspect is that we try to provide a space to experiment. So the payments that the grantees receive through Prototype Fund, they are not milestone-based, but they are based on the hours worked that they spend on working on their code. So, for example, if they have to put more work into one milestone than they expected, this is okay, this is totally fine, this doesn't change the granted sum in any way, and it's also encouraged. And for example, if they have to change their plans because they want to integrate user feedback they got early on, this is also very much encouraged from our side. So, yeah, for me it's very important that we give people the opportunity to test out ideas that they would not be able to test out in another environment, for example, in their day jobs or also when they get like more traditional sort of funding.
And the last one is that we see ourselves as a learning program. So officially we're a research program, which means we write a lot of report about how funding open source and how works and how the open source community works. And we learned a lot by doing this, and we try to not ignore these learnings, and we try to implement them immediately into how we fund and how we approach supporting our grantees.
Yeah, so to make all of this a little bit more tangible, I want to give you a very short glimpse into a few projects of the almost 400 that we have funded. So the first one, I mentioned it already in the introduction. It's called Drip. It's a very cool mobile app that you can use for period tracking if you need an app like that. And it stores your data locally. It never passes it on, except for if you export it yourself and like transfer it to some other app that, of course, is allowed. But they would never do like anything with your data.
The next example I'm bringing is Nextcloud. We have funded several Nextcloud apps. Of course, it's a company, but there are also community-driven apps in the Nextcloud ecosystem. And what we funded here was a knowledge-based tool that is inside your Nextcloud. The people came from an activist collective background, and they wanted to do this, and it turned out it was also useful for other cases like business customers because it's such a great basic tool. So they integrated the Nextcloud tool team after funding the devs from this.
The next project example I want to give is called Follow the Grant. And this project is showcasing potential conflicts of interest for scientific studies. So, for example, if a study is sponsored by Big Pharma, and the people who developed that were some data journalists who developed the model based on the follow money approach by Aleph, and this is an open source software used for structured data research in investigative newsrooms, and up until now they have evaluated, I think, almost 5 million medical articles with Follow the Grant. And
the last one we brought was the open source implementation of the new standard messaging layer security. It's basically a new standard to do encryption in messaging better and fix some issues with existing ways we do encrypted messaging now, like federation and encryption in large groups.
Yeah, and there are so many more projects that we have funded, and like a lot of them are really amazing and interesting. So if you are interested, please check them out in our project database at prototypefund.de.
So I said at the beginning that there are some problems with funding and innovation, and of course it's super easy for us to pick 4 projects that are super successful from the almost 400 we funded, and we like to say there's many more that are successful, but this criticism, it's somehow valid. That idea of producing a software graveyard is something we're constantly scared we'd do. We're very aware that this is an issue. We know that we're distributing tax money as we work with the ministry, and our duty is to do the best we can with this tax money and not like spending on stuff that is not helpful. But before we get into how to get better, I'd like to say one thing. Maybe it doesn't matter that much if a project survives, if something else comes out of it. We have funded projects that became companies, but we've also funded projects where the project doesn't exist in itself anymore, but the person has learned a lot. Maybe they brought this knowledge in another community. Maybe a community was built. Maybe we learned something about something that doesn't work. So there are other ways to benefit as a general community from funding than having a successful project that goes on to be a big community or a business. At Prototype Fund, we've seen people fail a lot of times, even say it on stage at the end of the demo day, this is not possible because the data doesn't exist or whatever. But pieces of the code are reused. And we get this question a lot from different areas. How many businesses were created out of Prototype Fund? What are your KPIs? All that kind of stuff. And we really want to say there are many ways to be successful in open source, and not only that one that we imagine.
Yeah, so with all of that being said, when our funding period expired, like this year, last year, we knew that it was time to change the way that we fund a little bit. And over the past 8 years, we definitely learned a lot. And then we also talked to other funders. We talked to people in the open source ecosystem. Most importantly, we talked to a lot of our alumni. And yeah, with all of the knowledge and learnings gathered, we were able to finally launch a new and more grown-up and hopefully more sustainable version of the prototype fund. We're telling you this because we think some of the things that we learned in the past might also be relevant to you. So here are a few of the novelties in the new prototype fund and how they came about. So the first important point is called more than code. So as a lot of funders, I would say maybe all funders in this field do, we focus on funding working hours for writing code. But it is obvious that software needs more than that. It needs design, it needs to be presented at conferences, it needs a lot of communication work in general, it needs documenting, etc., etc. And this work needs to be funded too. And this does not only mean like, yeah, implicitly we fund that too, but like time needs to be set aside to do these things specifically. Also, I bet in the whole wide world, there's not a single person who can do all of the things I mentioned before themselves. So it's crucial to fund teams, and it's crucial to fund interdisciplinary teams with non-techie members. And these non-techie team members are just as important as the other ones, and they need to be acknowledged, they need to be appreciated, and of course they need to be paid as well. And just like digital sovereignty, as we heard before in the keynote, transcend borders, software communities transcend borders as well. And this is hard to take into account when the fund doesn't. And a lot of funds are limited, for example, to specific regions or specific nations. But if you fund only a part of the team, this creates a lot of imbalances. And as I just said before, it really matters that all of the team members are appreciated, acknowledged, and that they are paid. Then the next aspect is one of the ones that's like most important to me, and it's access to a network and expertise. So there are some developers that already like know their way around. They have a network and they have all the things they need, but then there are a lot of projects that are only getting started. And for them, it's super important, and I cannot stress this enough, to offer coachings, to offer opportunities, to talk to experts, to grant them access to existing communities. And yeah, these things can make all the difference for the success of a project.
The one thing when we ask our grantees what they need is more time. They always say that, and we didn't put it first because they seem to always think it's the solution and it's not the only one. And but in the end, more time in a context where it's really hard to get funding, every month counts. So we want to acknowledge that that is the case. But in the spirit of more than code, maybe the extra time can be there for stuff that is more than code. And in the end, one of the essential points to build a sustainable project is long-term planning. The need for more time happens when you haven't planned for what happens after funding. So our role as funders is to constantly remind people, what are you doing after funding? You won't think of that the last day before it ends, because then you'll be broke and get a job instead of having set up something. And the last but not least, this is a reminder, mostly for all funders, flexible structures, because we say we do a lot of stuff like offering coachings and having one-on-one check-ins and stuff, but people know what they want to do with the time when they're funded, and not wasting people's time with having too much structures and forgetting their experts is a good reminder.
Yeah, with all of that being said, we really don't think that we have it all figured out already. But if you are interested in what we're doing and how we're doing it and what we're thinking about when we're doing it, feel free to check out our website new.prototypefund.de, where we explain a lot of the things that we mentioned before. And for all the people who might be interested in applying, the next application phase will start in October of this year.
I think we have very little time left, but there's last thing we want to say. We are always happy to push Prototype Fund as a program and make our program and grantees more known. But one thing that's really great for us is when we see more programs like this emerge. Prototype Fund cannot cover all needs of the open source community, and we need more of these funds. So if you know a way that a fund could be set up, if you're in touch with the local government, with a funder that wants to do something, we're always happy to support and help with our experience of doing this for a long time. We have some time and energy and resources to share. Because we need no single point of failure in funding. This is more important than ever. We've learned that with OTF being cancelled by Trump a few years ago. The same thing is happening all over again. In Europe, it's not really better when we see the difficulties that NLNet is facing in the Netherlands, another free and open source funding program. And not having a single point of failure is one of the ways we're going to be resilient as a community. And we want to call for not making your own fund the biggest you can, but like having a network of small funds that can support each other and pick up people who maybe don't fit in other funds or the work of funds that are cancelled for various reasons.
So after hearing all of that, if you feel like getting attached because you're interested in a project that we fund, or because you're interested in setting up a fund yourself or joining one or whatever, here's how to reach us. Also, Maria and I will be here today. And yeah, again, for the people who might want to apply, there's loads and loads and loads of info on the website, so check that out. But also, of course, ask us questions while we're here today. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you for the talk. You mentioned that you don't base the funding on milestones, but on hours, which my intuition tells me sounds like a good idea, but it also sounds like it could open the door for abuse or fraud. Is that something you have an issue with, or is this a non-issue for some reason?
I would say it's rather a non-issue because, I mean, I don't really know why it is. Maybe we're just lucky, or it's just, I don't know, the people that are like drawn to us, but I feel like most of them are really intrinsically motivated and they have their ideas and they want to get to work on their ideas and it's super important to them and they're just happy to receive the funding. And I mean, I think there have been like a handful of cases where we were like not so sure what the people were doing with their time, but all of the rest, I think people just did what they wanted to do in the beginning. And I mean, also in the end, they are like supposed to present some kind of prototype at the demo day. And also I feel like it's just embarrassing for them if they can't present anything. So, yeah.
Hi, I help NLNet. So I'm responsible for software testing for any of their projects they've ever sponsored. You haven't mentioned whether you do something similar in your mentoring program, and if not, perhaps it's something you'd be interested in doing.
So we do some coachings and that kind of stuff, and we always dream about what we'd like to be able to offer, and stuff like audits, which I guess what you mean more.
So there's audits, there's software testing, there's usability. There are 7 different areas, licensing, all of which are available.
Yeah, we've seen that they do that, and in a dream world where we have unlimited funds, we'd like to do that. We don't have the funds for this at the moment. What we do is we have coachings with some coaching partners that we've been working with for many years. Some of the coaches are even in the room. And that is helpful, but of course, on top, we'd love to have testing. So.
And also, like for the new version of the Prototype Fund, we're also adding some coachings, for example, licensing, accessibility. So like peu à peu, there's more coming.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.